So a few weeks ago, Samyang, or also known as Rokinon, rang me up and asked, would you be interested in trying one of our Tiny Series lenses? For those of you who are not aware, the Tiny Series lenses by Samyang are some of the most compact and lightweight, and being Samyang, quite affordable lenses designed for the Sony E mount. And so far, the series includes lenses like the 18mm f2.8, the 24 and 35mm f2.8, which are really tiny, and now the 35, 45, and the 75mm f1.8, and they're all autofocus lenses. And when I say affordable, within the Tiny Series, the most expensive lens right now is $399 US, which is less than some full-frame kit lenses nowadays. So after going over the options, I decided to go with the 75mm f1.8, which I have right here, and what intrigued me the most to try this lens was the focal length. I don't know if you ever feel this way, but when I'm shooting with a prime, there are often times when I feel like 50mm is not quite tight enough, but then 85 is a little too close sometimes. So I thought 75mm would be a pretty interesting focal length to try, not just for things like conventional portraits, but for also things like travel and street photography as well, because this is such a small lens whenever we can start doing that again. The lens comes with a pretty decent hood and a nice little clamshell case. And normally I never use these cases that come with lenses, but this is so light and small, I might always keep the lens in it when I'm not using it. My first impression of the lens was that although this is indeed a small lens, obviously this isn't like a pancake lens small, but this is incredibly light. Just to give you guys an idea of how this feels, this lens is 230 grams, which is about 140 grams lighter than the Sony 85 1.8, which is already a pretty small and light lens. And it's also about 13mm or half an inch shorter and narrower as well. The Sony lens uses a 67mm filter thread, while the Samyang uses 58mm. Of course, being so light, this is not the most rugged feeling lens in the world, but again, for the price, the build quality seems pretty good, and while mounted on the camera, it feels quite solid as well, and there are no loose joints or anything that rattles inside the lens. The focus ring is also very well dampened. Some might find it a little stiff, especially for manual focusing during video, but I think it's good for fine-tuning your focus for stills within close distances, and it might get broken in over time. Instead of the traditional autofocus switch, the lens has a customizable switch that lets you choose what to do with the focus ring, kind of similar to the control ring on Canon RF lenses. So you can use it as an autofocus switch if you want to, or you can set up one of the modes so that you can use the ring to control the aperture, for example. To customize the lens or update the firmware, you need Samyang's lens station for the Sony E mount. With any third-party lenses, keeping up the latest firmware can sometimes really transform your experience with the product. I'll talk more about how to use the lens station in a separate video. But of course, the most important thing about a lens is the image quality. It doesn't matter if it has the best hardware or the best price if the images are terrible. And I'm glad to say I was pleasantly surprised there as well. This lens is sharp, and I always say sharpness isn't everything when it comes to image quality, but it's never a bad thing either. I made a comparison video about a bunch of 85mm lenses for the Sony E mount a few months ago, and at wide open, I think this is as sharp or sharper than any of them from corner to corner, and some of the lenses cost 3 or 4 times more than this. Step it down to 2.8, the contrast improves a bit, but other than that, it seems like there's no huge penalty in sharpness while shooting wide open. And again, a very subtle improvement at f4, but I'll probably always keep this in f1.8. It also handled flare and chromatic aberration extremely well, which are often what differentiates cheaper and more expensive lenses. Only in some extreme cases, like here shooting wide open directly into the sun, there were some hints of purple and green fringing, but just stepping it down a little completely got rid of it, and it was never an issue most of the time while not shooting towards the light. In order to control the chromatic aberration, Samyang used a certain combination of low dispersion and high refractive lenses, in addition to the UMC coating to reduce any internal reflections. To be completely honest, I don't have a slightest idea of what that means, but it sounds like they know what they're doing. I often find the background blur on some 1.8 lenses to be quite busy and distracting, But that wasn't the case with this lens. I found the bokeh to be quite pleasing, and there were certain softness and dreaminess that I usually find on much more expensive lenses, and it handled extremely busy background and foreground elements really well. The bokeh balls were quite nice and round, and I didn't see any onion ring effects, and step it down to 2.8 and on, you start to see the 9 aperture blades, but they stay quite even and I didn't notice any distracting shapes. Its minimum focusing distance is 0.69 meters or 2.26 feet, which is pretty typical for a lens like this, and it's not a macro lens by any means, but at close range, you can create some incredible results. Shooting wide open at this range, it's difficult to make any photos look bad. The autofocus in general performed quite well, and it's not the snappiest autofocusing lens, but it's far from the slowest, and its speed seems pretty typical for a portrait lens like this, and the fact that it's a third-party lens didn't seem to affect the performance in any negative ways. On my A7 III, the tracking worked as well as any other native Sony lenses, and even the animal eye autofocus on my dog seemed to work really well without any issues. So I think that pretty much sums up this lens. I was quite pleasantly surprised by its value and the image quality and the autofocus performance, and I had a lot of fun using this lens. Normally you buy third-party lenses for the value while giving up some performance, but neither for the price or the performance, I really couldn't find anything negative to say about it. I guess if I were being really picky, like I said, it's not the most durable or expensive feeling piece of hardware, but it's meant to be light and small. It's called a Tiny Series for a reason, and at least it seems to be built really well. It doesn't seem like it's gonna fall apart any minute. And you do need to get a lens station to update the firmware or to customize the lens, and that's an additional $60 you're gonna need to spend. But that's nothing unusual for third-party lenses, and the lens is $329 at B&H at the time of making this video. So with the lens and the lens station combined, it's still about $160 less than the Sony 85 1.8, which is an incredible deal. So the Samyang or Rokinon 75mm F1.8 autofocus lens, I was very impressed by its value and performance, so I would highly recommend this to anyone. So that's gonna be it for me today, and let me know in the comments, do you own any of the Tiny Series lenses, and what do you think about them? Would you like me to review any more of them? Because if the other lenses are anything like this one, I'll be pretty happy to try them. And as always, if you have any more questions about this lens, just leave a comment down below and I'll try to get to them all. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.